On a stormy evening in Brookside County, a nurse named Lena Porter heard a car go through a bridge railing and into the canal. She didn't call for help. She didn't wait. She ran toward the water, dove in, shattered the rear window with her bare hands, and pulled an unconscious 8-year-old boy out of a sinking SUV. Officer Brian Huxley arrived on the scene and looked at her, a black woman in soaking wet clothes, and reached for his handcuffs. Within 90 seconds, the woman who saved that child was face down on the asphalt. Brookside County in October is not a gentle place when it rains. It is not the kind of rain that taps politely at windows and makes people grateful to be indoors. When a storm comes off the ridge and finds the canal valley, it comes with the particular fury of water that has been building pressure for hours and has finally found somewhere to go. The canal runs through the center of the county like a seam, and on nights when the rain is serious, it stops being a drainage feature and starts being something else entirely. Something with a current, something with an opinion about what belongs in it and what doesn't. By 9 o'clock on the evening of October 3rd, the rain had been falling for 4 hours. The canal was running 2 feet above its normal level. The surface was black and churning, catching the lights from the Millbrook Bridge and throwing them back broken. And the sound it made was not the sound of water, but the sound of something moving fast that had no intention of slowing down. Most people who crossed the Millbrook Bridge that night crossed it quickly, windows up, eyes on the road ahead. The weather made that reasonable. What happened next made it something they would think about for the rest of their lives. Lena Porter was 30 minutes from home when the storm turned serious. She was 29 years old and had been a registered nurse for 4 years, the last 2.5 of them in the pediatric unit at Brookside General, where the hours were long and the fluorescent lighting was the specific shade of institutional white that follows you home behind your eyes on the bad days. Today had been a bad day in the ordinary way that pediatric nursing produces bad days. Not catastrophic, just the accumulated weight of 12 hours of other people's fear and pain absorbed through competence and composure, because that was the job, and she was good at it. She was 5'6", solidly built, with the particular posture of someone who spends most of her working life on her feet and has learned to carry herself in a way that conserves energy across a 12-hour shift. She wore her scrubs still, dark teal, at the Brookside General standard, because she had come straight from the hospital without stopping at her apartment first. She had meant to stop. She had a sibling situation to manage. Her youngest brother, Marcus, 17, had texted her at 6:30 to say the electricity bill had not been paid and the lights were out, and she had been running the logistics of that problem in the back of her mind for the last 3 hours, the way nurses run secondary problems, noted, filed, not forgotten, and addressed when the primary situation allows. Her bag was on the passenger seat. It weighed more at the end of a shift than it did at the beginning, which made no physical sense and happened every time. She had a container of leftover rice in there she had packed for lunch and not eaten, because the afternoon had not been the kind that permitted lunch. She was thinking about eating it cold in the car rather than waiting until she got home. And she was thinking about Marcus and the electricity bill, and she was thinking about whether she had enough in her account to cover it before the end of the week. And she was doing all of this thinking in the ordinary simultaneous way that people with responsibilities do their thinking when they are tired and almost home. She was not thinking about the canal. She pulled off Riverside Road onto the shortcut that ran parallel to the water because it saved 6 minutes, and 6 minutes mattered tonight. And the rain was loud on the roof of her car, and the wipers were working hard, and the canal was visible through the passenger window as a darkness that moved differently from the darkness around it, fast and purposeful and indifferent to the weather that was feeding it. Lena reached into her bag without looking and found the container of rice. She opened it on her knee. Ahead of her, through the rain, the Millbrook Bridge was lit by the amber wash of 2 streetlights, and a dark blue SUV was making the turn onto it from the north approach, moving faster than the conditions suggested it should have been moving. She noticed it the way you notice things peripherally when you are doing something else. Registered, not analyzed, filed in the part of the brain that monitors the background, while the foreground handles rice and electricity bills and a brother in a dark apartment. She brought the first forkful up. The sound came before the light. A wrenching, grinding impact, the specific percussion of vehicle metal meeting bridge railing under serious force, and then something that was different from the crash, a secondary sound, lower and more final, the sound of weight and momentum finding no more resistance and continuing downward into something that received it without protest. The container was still in her hand. She was already pulling over. Lena was out of the car before she had made a conscious decision to be. The rain hit her immediately, not the managed rain of a person moving between a building and a vehicle, but the full force of an October storm with nothing between her and it. Her scrubs soaked through in the first 10 seconds. She was already running. The canal bank was 12 feet below the bridge level, accessible by a concrete slope that the county had installed for maintenance access, and that was running with water now, which slick and fast. Lena hit the slope at speed and used the railing to control her descent rather than fight it, her sneakers finding no traction on the wet concrete, but her hands finding the rail and her body following the angle down without stopping, because stopping was not the available option. She could see the SUV from the bank. It had gone in nose first, and the current was already working on it, pushing the rear quarter around so the vehicle sat at an angle to the flow, the driver's side partially submerged, the rear end still above the waterline but dropping. The headlights were still on beneath the surface, illuminating the canal floor in a wide, pale cone that made the darkness above it darker by contrast. She could see a shape in the back seat. She could not yet tell if it was moving. She went into the water. The cold was a physical fact, not a sensation. The kind of cold that arrives not as discomfort, but as information. This environment is hostile. This environment will work against you. This environment does not care what you need from it. The current caught her immediately, and she angled into it the way she had been taught in a water safety course she had taken 8 years ago and mostly forgotten, using her body as a wedge rather than fighting the force directly. The canal bottom was 8 feet down. She was not touching it. She was swimming toward a vehicle that was still moving, still settling, the current pressing it against the bank in a slow rotation that was going to put the rear end under before she reached it, if she did not reach it in the next 30 seconds. She reached the rear quarter panel and grabbed it. The interior light was still on. Through the rear passenger window she could see him clearly now. A boy, 8 years old, slight, was strapped into a booster seat that was designed to keep him safe in a collision and was now keeping him in a vehicle that was filling with canal water. His head was dropped forward. He was not moving. On the seat beside him, half submerged, was a backpack with a name tag clipped to the strap. She could read it through the glass. Noah. She hit the window with her elbow. The underwater physics of it were different from anything she had anticipated. The water pressure from outside was pressing against the glass, while she was pressing from inside the vehicle's diminishing air pocket, which meant the strike needed to overcome both the glass's resistance and the external pressure simultaneously. Her first strike produced a crack, a bright spiderweb fracture that ran from the point of impact to the upper corner. She hit it again in the same spot. The fracture spread. The water was at her chest now. She hit it a third time with everything she had, rotating from her core, her elbow finding the center of the web, and the window gave. It did not shatter. It folded inward, a concave collapse of safety glass that opened a gap large enough for her arm, and then, with the pressure of the water following it, large enough for the rest of what she needed. The water came in fast. Lena reached through the opening and found the seatbelt buckle. Her fingers were already losing dexterity from the cold. She pressed the release twice before it caught, and the belt snapped free. Noah's weight shifted forward, and she caught him under the arms through the window opening, her forearms against the broken glass edge, and she pulled. He was heavier than he looked. Unconscious weight is different from cooperative weight. It does not assist, does not adjust, does not find the angle that makes extraction easier. And Lena pulled against 60 pounds of dead weight through a window gap that was not designed for this purpose, while the canal filled the interior around her and the current pulled at her from behind. And somewhere above her, on the bridge, a woman was screaming his name over and over in the particular register of a person who has nothing left except the sound. The window frame took the skin off both her forearms on the way out. She did not notice. She had him. She turned in the water with Noah against her chest, his face above the surface, and she swam for the bank the same way she had entered, angled against the current, not fighting it, using it to carry her sideways toward the concrete slope while it tried to carry her downstream. Her legs were going numb, her arms were cut and bleeding into the water around her. She kept swimming. She got her feet under her in the shallows, and she walked out of the canal carrying an 8-year-old boy, the way she had walked out of difficult situations her entire career. One foot, then the other, until the ground held. She laid him on the bank, and she turned him, and she did what her hands knew how to do. He coughed. Then he breathed. Lena sat back on her heels in the rain, her hands shaking, the canal water still running off her, and she heard the voices coming down the bank from the bridge above, a woman crying, a man calling for someone to call 911, someone else saying, "Oh my God, oh my God." And for one moment, one single, unrepeatable moment, there was nothing in the world except a boy breathing on a canal bank and the specific relief of a job that needed doing having been done. Then she saw the blue and red lights moving fast along Riverside Road, and she looked up, and she waited. Officer Brian Huxley had been with the Brookside County Police Department for 6 years and had developed, over those 6 years, the particular confidence of a man whose instincts had never been formally challenged. He had filed 43 arrest reports. He had received 7 complaints. None of the 7 had resulted in discipline. In Huxley's internal accounting, this meant his instincts were good. It did not occur to him that it meant something else. He pulled onto the Riverside Road access point at 9:41 and sat for a moment with the engine running, taking in the scene through his windshield, the way he always took in scenes before he entered them, assessing, categorizing, deciding. He saw the SUV's headlights below the waterline. He saw the concrete bank. He saw a group of civilians on the bridge above, some of them filming, some of them leaning over the railing. And he saw, on the bank directly below, a black woman in wet clothing crouched over a child. Huxley's assessment took less than 4 seconds. He had not yet opened his door. He got out with his hand on his weapon. The bank was slick, and he took the maintenance slope carefully, which was the only careful thing about his approach. The woman was still crouched when he reached the bottom. She had the child turned on his side, and her hands were moving across his back with a practiced efficiency that Huxley did not register as medical. He registered it as contact. He registered the child as a white male. He registered the woman as unknown, wet, and black, and he registered the gap between those two things as a situation requiring control. "Hey, step away from him. Hands where I can see them." Lena looked up. Her hands were bleeding. Her scrubs were soaked through and plastered to her skin, and the teal color of them was dark with canal water. Noah was breathing steadily under her hands. She had just pulled him out of a sinking car. "I'm a nurse," she said. "He was in the canal. I got him out. He needs—" I said, "Hands up. Step away from the child. Now." Behind her, coming down the bank slope, was a man she didn't recognize. Heavyset, moving fast, his face white with shock. He reached the bottom of the slope and looked at Noah, and his knees went briefly wrong under him. He grabbed Lena's arm. "She saved him," he said to Huxley, his voice cracking. "She went in the water." She pulled him out. "I watched her from the bridge. That's my son." "Sir, step back." "She saved my son's life. She's a nurse. You need to—" "Step back from the scene." Noah's father stepped back, because he did not know what else to do. He kept his eyes on Noah, who was breathing, who was alive, who was breathing, and he did not know what was happening, and he could not make it stop. A paramedic came down the slope behind him. The first unit had arrived on the bridge above and was sending personnel down on foot. She reached the bank and took in Lena's position over Noah and moved toward them with her kit, and Huxley turned and said, "Hold on." And she stopped, because he had his hand on his weapon, and she was not going to argue with a hand on a weapon. Lena looked at the paramedic. The paramedic looked at Lena. Something passed between them that had no language. "What is she being detained for?" the paramedic said. Huxley didn't answer her. He was looking at Lena. "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." "I need you to tell me what I'm being detained for," Lena said. Her voice was steady. She had spent 4 years keeping her voice steady in rooms where things were going wrong, and steadiness was the only tool available. "I pulled that child out of the water. There are people on the bridge who filmed it. That man is his father. Now I'm a registered nurse. I need you to tell me what I have done." Huxley looked at her for a moment. A man filming from the bridge called down something that the rain made indistinct. "Noah's father said her name," said Lena. "Said she saved him. Said, 'This is wrong.'" And Huxley said, "Turn around," for the 3rd time, and this time he said it with his weapon drawn and pointed at the canal bank 6 inches from where Lena was kneeling. She turned around. The zip ties went on over the cuts from the window glass, over the hands that had broken through a submerged car window and held a child's airway open on a rain-soaked bank, and the plastic bit into the wounds, and Lena did not make a sound, because making a sound wasn't going to stop this. And she understood that now, with complete and terrible clarity. "What are the charges?" she said, her face turned toward the canal. Huxley was already moving her toward the slope. "Tampering with the scene," he said, "obstructing an active investigation." The words landed like what they were, not reasons, not law. Words pulled from a form that needed filling, assembled in the 4 seconds before he had opened his car door, and dressed now in official language to cover a conclusion he had reached before he knew a single fact about what had happened on this bank. Lena let them walk her up the slope. At the top, she could see the phones. 8 of them, maybe 10, held up along the bridge railing, their screens bright in the rain, recording everything. She could see Noah's father kneeling on the bank below, his hand on his son's chest, his face upturned toward her, with an expression she did not have a word for. She had spent her entire career in institutions that trusted her with the worst moments of people's lives. So she had held the hands of children who were afraid, and parents who were losing, and colleagues who were breaking, and she had never once been asked by any of those institutions whether she was safe to have in the room. One institution had just answered that question differently. She got into the back of the patrol car without being shoved, because she was not going to give Huxley the additional satisfaction of her resistance. And she sat with her bound hands behind her back, and she watched through the rain-streaked window as the paramedic finally reached Noah. And she watched his chest rise and fall, steady and alive. And she thought about the electricity bill, and Marcus in the dark apartment, and the rice container still open on the passenger seat of her car. And she thought that if she had driven a different way home tonight, none of this would have happened. Then she thought about Noah breathing, and she decided that she would do it again. The booking sergeant's name was Delgado, and she had been with Riverside County PD for 11 years and had processed enough people across her desk to have developed a specific and reliable instinct for when something was wrong with what she was receiving. What she was receiving at 10:17 on the evening of October 3rd was wrong. She looked at Lena, the soaked scrubs, the zip tie marks still visible on both wrists where the cuffs had been moved for processing, and the lacerations across both forearms that had dried to a dark rust color without being cleaned or treated. And she looked at Huxley's report, which described the subject as having been found tampering with the scene of a vehicle incident. And she looked at Lena again. "You need medical attention," Delgado said. It was not a question. "Yes," Lena said. The lacerations on my forearms need irrigation and closure. My hands are the same. I've been in canal water, contaminated water. The longer they go untreated, the higher the infection risk. She said it the way she said things at work, factually, without affect, because affect did not help, and facts occasionally did. Delgado looked at the forms in front of her. She looked at Huxley, who was standing at the edge of the processing area, with the expression of a man who has completed a task and is waiting for the administrative confirmation of its completion. "Get her something for the hands," Delgado said to the officer nearest the supply cabinet. "Gauze at minimum." The officer produced gauze. It was the wrong grade for what Lena's forearms needed, and they both knew it. But Lena wrapped it herself with the automatic competence of someone who had dressed wounds in worse conditions and did not say anything because Delgado had done what she could do, and both of them understood the ceiling of what that was. They photographed her. They took her bag. On her phone, her hospital ID. The ID gave Delgado a moment's pause. She held it for a second longer than the other items before placing it in the property bag. But she did not say anything, and Lena did not say anything. And the moment passed, the way moments inside institutions pass, when the institution has already made its determination, and the humans inside it are not empowered to reverse it. The holding cell was at the end of a corridor that smelled of cleaning product and old concrete. It was cold in the specific way of rooms that are never warm, regardless of the season. And Lena sat on the metal bench and put her gauze-wrapped hands in her lap and took inventory of her body the way she took inventory of patients, systematically, without judgment, beginning at the top. Her core temperature was low. Not dangerously low, not yet, but the kind of low that would become dangerous if not addressed, and it was not being addressed. Her forearms were a problem she had already catalogued. Her right shoulder had taken something during the extraction, a strain, possibly a partial tear of the infraspinatus, which would declare itself more clearly in the next 12 hours. She had swallowed canal water, not a large amount but enough to monitor. She had a headache forming behind her left eye that was probably tension, and probably also the beginning of something she did not have the equipment to assess without a hospital. She was a nurse in a holding cell who needed a nurse and did not have one. The irony of this was so precise and so complete that she sat with it for a long time without moving. Outside the holding cell, on a bridge over Brookside Canal, a 22-year-old named Darius Webb had been filming on his phone since Lena went into the water. He had footage of the descent down the bank. He had footage of the extraction. He had footage, clear and continuous, of Lena on the bank with Noah across her lap, her hands moving with clinical purpose, and he had footage of Huxley arriving and the zip ties going on, and Lena being walked up the concrete slope with her hands bound behind her while the paramedic finally reached the child she had pulled from the water. Darius posted it at 10:23 with a caption that was 8 words long. "A nurse saved a kid. They arrested her." He had 412 followers. Within 40 minutes, the video had been viewed 11,000 times. Within an hour, it had been shared by 3 local news accounts and a regional civil rights organization with 60,000 followers. By midnight, it had cleared 200,000 views and was being picked up by national aggregators who recognized in its 8 seconds of central footage a woman in soaked scrubs, hands bound, being walked away from a child she had just saved. An image that required no caption at all. Across town, in the pediatric ward waiting room at Brookside General, a woman named Claire Osei sat with her phone in both hands and watched the video for the 5th time. She was Noah's mother. She had arrived at the hospital 20 minutes after the ambulance and had been told that her son was stable, that his vitals were good, that he had swallowed some water, but his lungs were clear, and that the woman who pulled him out of the car had kept his airway open on the bank until the paramedics arrived, and that this had been the correct thing to do and had likely made the difference. She had asked for the woman's name. Nobody had been able to tell her. Until Darius Webb's video appeared in her feed, and she saw, in the corner of the frame, the hospital ID being placed into a property bag, and she read the name on it clearly. Lena Porter, RN. Claire Osei was not on social media in any serious way. She had a Facebook account she used to share photographs of Noah's school events with her mother in Accra. She had 480 Facebook friends, most of them parents from Noah's school and colleagues from the accounting firm where she worked. She typed for 3 minutes. She attached the video. She wrote that the woman in it had saved her son's life and was currently in a Brookside County holding cell, and that this was wrong in a way she did not have adequate words for, but was going to try to find them anyway. She hit post. In the holding cell, Lena did not know any of this. She knew that her shoulder was worsening and that the gauze on her forearms needed changing and that Marcus was in a dark apartment and did not know where she was. She knew that Noah had been breathing when they put her in the car, and she was holding that fact carefully, the way you hold something fragile, because it was the only unambiguously good thing currently in her possession. She did not know that her name was already moving through the night faster than Huxley's report. She pulled her knees up and leaned her back against the wall and waited for the morning in the way that people wait for things they cannot accelerate, with the particular patience of someone who has learned, through the specific education of a difficult life, that some hours simply have to be survived. Outside, the footage kept spreading. By 6 o'clock the following morning, Darius Webb's video had been viewed 1.4 million times. It had not started that way. The first hour was modest, 11,000 views, a few hundred shares, the organic spread of something that people recognized as wrong before they had the language to explain why. And then a civil rights organization with 60,000 followers shared it at 11:45 with a single line of commentary. This woman saved a child and was arrested for it. And the algorithm found the seam it had been looking for and pulled. By midnight, it was at 200,000. By 2 in the morning, it had cleared 500,000. By the time the morning news producers were selecting their lead stories for the 6 o'clock broadcast, they were selecting a story that had already told itself to most of their audience. Claire Osei's Facebook post moved differently from Darius's video, but it moved just as fast. She had 480 friends, and within 3 hours, every one of them had seen it, and most of them had shared it, and the shares had reached people who did not know Claire and did not know Noah and had never heard of Brookside County, but who understood, from a mother's 3 minutes of typing, exactly what had happened on that canal bank and exactly what it meant. By morning, her post had been shared 14,000 times and had accumulated 2,000 comments, most of them variants of the same 2 words. Thank you. At 6:40 in the morning, a nurse named Patricia Okafor, who had worked alongside Lena in the Brookside General Pediatric Unit for 2 years, posted a photograph on her own account. It was a photograph of Lena from a hospital fundraiser the previous spring. Lena, in scrubs, laughing at something off camera, her hospital ID visible on her lanyard. Patricia wrote beneath it that Lena Porter was the best nurse she had ever worked with, and that Lena had spent 4 years keeping other people's children alive and had spent last night in a holding cell for doing it one more time, and that if anyone wanted to know who Lena Porter was, and they should ask the families on the pediatric ward who had sat with her through their worst nights. The post was shared 40,000 times before 9 in the morning. At 9:15, Dr. Raymond Achebe, Chief of Emergency Medicine at Brookside General, gave a statement to a local television crew in the hospital's car park. He did not raise his voice. He said that registered nurses were trained, licensed, legally authorized to perform emergency interventions, and that a nurse who performed such an intervention and was arrested for it created a public safety problem that extended far beyond one incident on one evening. He said that if the message delivered by the Brookside County PD was that medical professionals should hesitate before intervening in emergencies for fear of arrest, then Brookside County had a serious problem. He said it in the measured, specific language of a physician giving a diagnosis, and the clip ran on every major network by noon. By midday, the hashtag Justice for Lena was the second trending topic nationally. By 2 in the afternoon, it was the first. The backlash came, as it always does, By mid-morning, the Brookside County Police Officers Union released a statement at 10 o'clock describing Huxley as a dedicated officer who had responded to a chaotic scene under difficult conditions and made reasonable decisions to secure the area and protect the child. The statement noted that the situation had been assessed as an active incident and that Huxley had acted in accordance with his training and the department's protocols. A commentator on a national news channel said that, without knowing what the officer knew when he arrived, it was impossible to judge his response, and that the video did not show the full context of the situation. A thread appeared on several platforms arguing that Lena should have identified herself immediately upon Huxley's arrival, as though identification was something that could be offered more quickly than it had been, as though Huxley had paused long enough to receive it. The comment sections were wars, but the people who had been on the bank were not in the comment sections. They were on the phone with journalists. Brian Huxley spent the morning of October 4th at home in his apartment on the east side of Brookside, following the coverage on his laptop with the specific attention of a man assessing damage rather than absorbing information. He had been placed on administrative leave pending review, which was standard and which he had experienced once before, or 3 years ago, when a complaint had been filed and reviewed and closed without findings. He had survived that. He had survived all of them. 7 complaints. No discipline. The math was straightforward. He watched the clip of Dr. Achebe and thought that doctors always talked like this when police did their jobs, or always found the language of principle, when the reality was that someone had to make decisions in the field, and decisions in the field were not made in hospital car parks with camera crews. He read the union statement and found it satisfactory. He texted his union rep and received a reply within 4 minutes that said, "Sit tight, we've seen this before, it moves on." He believed this because it had always been true. And he closed the laptop and made himself lunch, and did not think about Lena Porter's hospital ID sitting in a property bag at the station, or about the 14,000 shares on a mother's Facebook post, or about the specific fact that 3 of his 7 prior complaints had been filed by people who had no platform and no Patricia Okafor and no Dr. Raymond Achebe standing in a car park telling the morning news what the arrest of a nurse actually meant. He thought he had managed this before. He had not managed this before. He just didn't know it yet. Lena was released at 7:40 in the morning on her own recognizance. No charges formally filed. The paperwork reading, "Pending further review in the specific language institutions use when they have made a mistake and are not yet prepared to say so." She walked out of the front entrance because the officer who processed her release pointed her toward the front entrance. And the front entrance opened onto a Tuesday morning in Brookside County that had no particular awareness of what she had been through in the previous 10 hours. The sky was pale, and the rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet pavement and exhaust, and somewhere nearby, someone was running a leaf blower. There were 3 camera crews outside. Lena stopped on the steps and looked at them and understood, from the volume of their presence and the speed with which they oriented toward her, that the night had not been quiet in the way she had experienced it as quiet. Something had been happening. She did not yet know the scale of it. A woman was standing apart from the camera crews to the left of the entrance, in a gray wool coat with a leather portfolio under her arm. She was 45, compact, with the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have learned to conserve energy for what matters. She was watching Lena with an attention that was not the attention of a journalist. She walked over before the camera crews reached the steps. "Lena Porter," she said, not a question. "My name is Sonia Ellery. I'm a civil rights litigator. I've been waiting for you." She handed Lena a card with one hand, and with the other, she positioned herself between Lena and the approaching cameras, in a movement so practiced it looked architectural. "Don't say anything to them. Not yet. But we need to talk first." "How do you know my name?" Lena said. "I've known Brian Huxley's name for 3 years," Sonia said. "Yours I learned last night." She had a car waiting. Lena got in. Sonia's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Clement Street, 12 minutes from the precinct. It was not a large office, and it was not a decorative one. It was a working office. Files on every surface, 2 whiteboards covered in case timelines, for a desk that held a laptop and 3 stacked folders, and a coffee maker that appeared to have been running since before dawn. There was a young man already seated at the conference table when they arrived. He had the look of someone who had not slept and did not intend to until the work was finished. "This is my associate, Daniel Reyes," Sonia said. "He has been reviewing the public records on Huxley since 11 o'clock last night." Lena sat down. Someone put coffee in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it because her hands were still cold, in the specific way that canal water produces cold, a deep tissue cold, that surface warmth takes a long time to reach. Sonia opened the top folder and placed it on the table between them without preamble. 7 complaints filed against Brian Huxley in 6 years, none resulting in discipline. 3 of the 7 were accompanied by supporting witness statements, so 2 of those 3 witness statement files are incomplete in the department's official records. She looked at Lena steadily. "I filed one of the 7. 18 months ago, on behalf of a man named Curtis Webb, who was detained on Riverside Road for what Huxley's report described as suspicious loitering. Mr. Webb was walking to his bus stop after a night shift. The complaint was reviewed and closed in 6 weeks. No findings." Lena looked at the folder. Curtis Webb. Riverside Road. Night shift. 3 years of the same road, she said. "The same road and the same pattern," Sonia said. "What you are is not an isolated incident. You are the 9th documented case, and the first one that was filmed from the moment of contact." She paused. "And the first one where the person arrested had just pulled a child out of a canal on camera before Huxley arrived." Daniel slid a second folder across the table. "We're filing a notice of intent to sue Brookside County, Brookside PD, I and Huxley personally. False arrest. Deprivation of civil rights under Section 1983. We're also filing a formal complaint with the State Civil Rights Division, which triggers an independent review of the department's complaint handling process." He turned a page. "That review is what gets us into the suppressed files, the ones that aren't incomplete by accident." Lena looked at the folders. She thought about the booking desk, the gauze that was the wrong grade. Said Delgado holding her hospital ID for a second longer than the other items, the ceiling of what some people could do from inside a system that had already made its determination. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Everything," Sonia said. "The full account of last night from the moment you heard the crash, your employment records from Brookside General, any prior interactions with Brookside PD, and most importantly, I need you to be prepared for this to become larger and more public than you currently expect it to be." She closed the first folder. "They will look for anything. Every complaint from a patient, every late shift, every financial difficulty. They will present you as someone other than who you are, and we will present the documentary record of who you actually are, which is a registered nurse with 4 years of exemplary service who spent last night in a holding cell for performing an emergency rescue." Lena was quiet for a moment. She thought about the conditioning that had spent 29 years telling her not to make noise. She thought about the holding cell and the wrong grade gauze and the property bag with her hospital ID in it. She thought about Noah's chest rising and falling in the rain. "I don't have much to hide," she said, as Sonia looked at her with the specific expression of a person who has been waiting for exactly that answer. "Good," she said, "because Huxley has quite a lot to lose, and we are going to make sure he loses all of it." Lena's deposition took place 4 months after the arrest, in a conference room on the 6th floor of the Brookside County Municipal Building, across a table from 2 attorneys representing the city and 1 representing Huxley personally. She wore her hospital ID on a lanyard over a gray blazer, because Sonia had told her to, and because she understood the logic, not performance, documentation. She was a registered nurse. She had been one before October 3rd, and she was one still. And the ID communicated that fact to everyone in the room before she said a single word. The city's lead attorney was a man named Gerald Fitch, who had been handling municipal liability cases for 20 years and had the particular confidence of someone who had made difficult things disappear before. He began with her background, her nursing education, her employment history. He asked about a formal complaint filed against her by a patient's family member 2 years prior, and Lena explained, without visible irritation, that the complaint had been reviewed, found to be without merit, and closed, and that her employment record was otherwise without incident, which was information Fitch already had because Sonia had provided it in discovery. He asked whether she had received any formal training in water rescue. She said no. He asked whether she had considered waiting for emergency services before entering the canal. She looked at him for a moment. Noah Osei was unconscious in a vehicle that was actively sinking, she said. The car was fully submerged within 90 seconds of my entry into the water. I am a pediatric nurse. I made a clinical assessment, and I acted on it. If I had waited for emergency services, Noah Osei would not have survived. That was not a difficult calculation. Fitch moved on. He tried 3 more angles over the following 2 hours, and Lena gave him the same thing each time. Calm, specific, factual, giving him nothing that could be shaped into a different story because there was no different story available. The facts were the facts. She had pulled a child from a canal. She had been arrested for it. Those 2 facts were not reconcilable into anything that benefited Gerald Fitch's client, and he knew it by the end of the 2nd hour, even if he would not say so until much later. Huxley's deposition was scheduled for the following week. He arrived with 2 attorneys, his union representative, and the personal lawyer he had retained with money he had borrowed from his brother. And he sat across from Sonia with the residual confidence of a man who had survived 7 complaints and had begun to believe that survival was a permanent condition rather than a streak that could end. Sonia did not begin with the arrest. She began with the record. Officer Huxley, in 6 years with Brookside County PD, you have received 7 formal complaints. Is that correct? I'd have to check the exact number. We have checked. The number is 7. She placed the complaint log on the table. Of those 7, how many resulted in any form of disciplinary action? None, because they were all reviewed and found to be unfounded. Yes, 3 of the 7 were found unfounded. The remaining 4 were closed without findings, which is a different determination. Are you aware of the difference? Huxley's attorney said he could answer. Huxley said he wasn't aware of a meaningful difference. The difference, Sonia said, is that closed, without findings, means the review was incomplete. Not that the complaint was assessed and dismissed. That it was not fully assessed. She placed a second document beside the first. 3 of your complaint files in the department's official record are missing witness statements that were confirmed as submitted by the complainants. Can you explain why those statements are absent from the files? He could not explain it. He said it was an administrative matter and not within his knowledge or control. Sonia moved to the statistical record. Of Huxley's documented stops on Riverside Road over 6 years, or 81% had involved black drivers, despite black residents comprising 34% of the Brookside County population. Of his 14 arrests for what his reports categorized as suspicious behavior or obstruction, 13 had involved black individuals. All 14 had been dismissed before trial. Huxley said he patrolled a specific corridor and that the demographics of his stops reflected the demographics of the activity in that corridor, and that he did not keep personal records of the race of individuals he encountered. The department keeps those records, Sonia said. We obtained them through discovery. Then she placed a third document on the table. It was a 1-page forensic summary from the digital recovery team that had been contracted by Sonia's firm to examine Huxley's department-issued phone, which had been submitted to the county's internal review process in October and returned with several data categories listed as deleted or unavailable. This is a forensic analysis of your department phone, Sonia said, conducted by a certified digital forensics examiner. The analysis recovered 112 deleted text messages from the 14-month period preceding the October 3rd incident. The content of those messages will be addressed in the appropriate proceeding. She looked at him. I want to confirm for the record that you are aware these messages existed. Huxley looked at the document. The change in him was not dramatic. It was not a flush or a flinch or any of the theatrical signals that people associate with the moment a lie meets its evidence. It was smaller than that. It was the specific stillness of a man whose body has received information that his face has not yet decided how to process. A half-second of total suspension, like a clock between ticks, in which everything that Huxley had believed about the durability of his position was being revised at a speed his expression could not quite keep up with. He looked at his attorney. His attorney put a hand on his arm and said they would need a moment. Sonia capped her pen. She said of course, and that they could take all the time they needed. She already had everything she came for. The trial began on a Monday in March, 5 months after the arrest, in the Riverside County Civil Courthouse on Alderman Street. The gallery was full in the way that rooms are full when a community has been waiting a long time for a specific accounting to occur. Noah Osei's school had sent a delegation. 3 nursing unions had sent representatives. The press benches were at capacity, and the overflow had been directed to a secondary room with a live feed that was also at capacity. Sonia's opening statement took 11 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. She told the jury that the evidence would show that Lena Porter had performed an emergency rescue that saved a child's life, that she had been arrested within 90 seconds of completing that rescue, that the arresting officer had ignored 4 separate witnesses who identified her as the rescuer, and that the charges filed against her, tampering with a scene, as obstructing an investigation, had been constructed after the arrest to justify a decision made before a single fact had been gathered. She told them that the case was not complicated. It had been made to appear complicated by a department that had spent 6 years making Brian Huxley's decisions appear more considered than they were. She told them that by the end of the week, they would have seen the full record of what that department had been protecting, and that the record would speak clearly enough that it would not require her to characterize it. The city's attorney, a woman named Barbara Crane, who had defended municipal clients for 18 years, told the jury that police officers made decisions in chaotic conditions with incomplete information, and that the standard was not perfection, but reasonable judgment, and that the evidence would show that Huxley's response to an unclear scene had been consistent with his training. She used the word chaotic 4 times in 6 minutes. She did not mention the 4 witnesses. The testimony began on day 2. Darius Webb described filming the rescue from the bridge and then filming the arrest, and said that at no point had Lena Porter behaved in any way that a reasonable person could describe as threatening or obstructive, and that he had said so to Huxley directly and been told to step back. The paramedic who had been on the bank testified that she had identified herself, only identified Lena as the individual who had performed the rescue and been instructed to hold her position by an officer whose hand was on his weapon. Noah's father, David Osei, testified that he had told Huxley his son's name and told him that the woman in the scrubs had saved his son's life, and that Huxley had told him to step back and had proceeded with the arrest. Each of these testimonies was delivered, and each of them landed the same way, not dramatically, but cumulatively, on the way evidence accumulates when it is all pointing in the same direction. On day 3, Claire Osei took the stand. She described arriving at the hospital and being told that Noah was stable and that the woman who pulled him from the canal had kept his airway clear until the paramedics arrived, and that this had made the difference. She described asking for the woman's name and not being able to get it until she found it in a video on her phone. She described typing for 3 minutes in a hospital waiting room because she did not have adequate words, but she had to try to find them. Her voice was steady throughout. When Sonia asked her whether she had been able to thank Lena Porter for what she did, Claire Osei said no. She said she had tried to reach her through the hospital, but that by the time she had, the story had become something larger than the 2 of them, and the moment for a private thank you had somehow been lost in everything that followed. She said she hoped Lena knew anyway. The courtroom was very quiet. On day 4, Sonia read the texts. The forensic examiner had authenticated them. The chain of custody was established. Sonia read from a printed transcript in the same voice she had used for the opening statement. Level, without editorial, without pause for effect. She read 6 messages. The 5th one contained the phrase. One of them Huxley had written to a colleague, referring to the individuals he regularly stopped on Riverside Road. The jury heard it once. Sonia did not repeat it. She did not look up from the transcript. She set the document down and said she had no further questions for the forensic examiner and returned to her seat. The jury's faces did the work. Lena took the stand on day 5. Fitch cross-examined her for 3 hours and gave her nothing she could not answer with the factual record that already existed. He noted that she had received significant public attention following the incident. She said she had not sought it. He noted that a foundation bearing her name had been announced. She said it had not been announced yet, and that if and when it was, its purpose would be to prevent situations like hers from happening to people who did not have what she had, which was a phone at the bottom of a canal and witnesses on a bridge. He asked if she would characterize herself as a hero. She said she would characterize herself as a nurse who saw a child in the water. Sonia asked her one question on redirect. Ms. Porter, knowing everything that followed, the arrest, the holding cell, the last 5 months, if you were on that road again on the evening of October 3rd, would you go into the water? Lena looked at the jury. She did not need to think about the answer because she had already thought about it, on the metal bench in the holding cell on the first night, with canal water still in her lungs and her hands wrapped in the wrong grade of gauze. Noah Osei was 8 years old, she said. He had a backpack with his name on it. He was unconscious in a car that had 40 seconds of air left in it. She paused. I'm a nurse. That's not a complicated question. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The jury returned on a Thursday afternoon in late March, and the foreperson, a retired school teacher named Margaret Obie, stood with the verdict form and read it into a courtroom that had stopped making sound. On the count of false arrest, they found for the plaintiff. A murmur moved through the gallery. On the count of excessive force, they found for the plaintiff. On the count of deprivation of civil rights under Section 1983, they found for the plaintiff. For compensatory damages, covering medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering, the jury awarded $1.1 million. The gallery absorbed this in the specific silence of people doing arithmetic. Then Margaret Obie read the punitive award, and the silence broke. $10 million, intended to communicate to Brookside County and to Brookside County PD that what had been done on the bank of that canal on the evening of October 3rd was not a reasonable decision made under difficult conditions. It was a pattern, and patterns had prices. Total award, $11.1 million. Lena sat very still. Sonia put a hand on her arm. At the defense table, Barbara Crane was already leaning toward her associate, and the conversation they were having was quiet and looked like the conversation of people recalibrating rather than disputing. Judge Patricia Warren waited for the gallery to settle and then said that she was referring the evidence presented in the trial, including the forensic recovery of deleted communications, to the Brookside County District Attorney's Office with a recommendation for criminal investigation into Officer Brian Huxley and into the department's complaint review processes. She said it in the same measured tone she had used for everything else, and brought the gavel down, and the second verdict landed in the room just as the first one had finished settling. Huxley was terminated the following day. The criminal indictment came 6 weeks later, on 4 counts, including false imprisonment, filing a false police report, and civil rights violations under federal statute. He was convicted 8 months after that. He did not return to law enforcement. He would not return to law enforcement anywhere in the United States. The 3 supervisors who had reviewed and closed his complaints without full investigation were the subject of a separate proceeding that resulted in 2 resignations and 1 termination. The Brookside County PD entered a federal consent decree requiring independent oversight, mandatory body camera protocols, and a civilian review board with actual investigative authority. It was not perfect. It was the floor. 1 year after the arrest, the Bridgelight Foundation held its first emergency response and legal rights training in a community center on Millbrook Road, 400 yards from the canal. Lena stood at the front of a room that held 32 people: nurses, teachers, transit workers, parents, 2 off-duty firefighters who had come because they had heard about it and wanted to, and she taught them what her hands had known on the night of October 3rd. How to assess a submerged vehicle. How to identify the correct strike point on safety glass. How to clear an airway on a bank in the rain. And when the practical instruction was finished, she stood with a woman named Sasha Briggs, 26 years old, a home health aide from the east side of Brookside County, and she handed her the Foundation's first certificate of completion, and they shook hands, and Sasha said she hoped she never needed any of it, and Lena said she hoped so too, and meant it, and also meant the other thing, on which was that if Sasha did need it, she would now know what to do, and would know that someone would stand beside her when she did. Noah Osei turned 9 in November. He had a birthday party at the community pool in his neighborhood, with 11 friends from his class, and a cake his mother made in the shape of a football, because he had recently decided that football was his primary interest, and that everything else was secondary. He was not at the canal that evening. He was at the pool, and then he was at home, and then he was asleep in his own bed, in the specific unconscious completeness of a 9-year-old who has had a full day and has no awareness of how contingent a full day can be, of how many things have to go right for an ordinary evening to remain ordinary. His mother knew. She thought about it sometimes, not every day, but on the days when it arrived, she let it arrive, and then she let it pass, because that was the only thing to do with it. And because Noah was asleep in the next room, and that was the answer to everything the thought contained. The Millbrook Bridge was repaired in December. New railing, engineered to a higher load specification than the original. The canal beneath it ran at its normal level through the winter, cold and dark and indifferent, doing what it had always done, which was move water from one place to another without any opinion about what occurred along its banks. Lena drove past it on her way to work most mornings. She did not slow down. She had a shift to get to, and a unit to staff, and a caseload that did not pause for her biography. And the canal was just a canal in the ordinary light of a Brookside County morning, its surface catching the sky and returning it broken and bright. She parked and walked into the hospital and clipped her ID to her lanyard and pushed through the doors into the pediatric unit where someone needed her, where someone was always going to need her, and she got to work. Her hands, when she pulled on her gloves at the scrub sink, still carried the faint linear scars from the window glass. Faded now, in the way that things fade without disappearing, visible if you knew to look. She had stopped looking. She had other things to do with her hands, and she was already doing them. $11.1 million. Was it enough? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you, to hit the like button and subscribe, because Lena's story is not the only one. There are more, and every single one of them matters.